So, renowned atheist intellectual Richard Dawkins has come out as a cultural Christian. If you know anything about Richard Dawkins, he wrote a book called The God Delusion and has been one of the four horsemen of new atheism that has done much in the late 90s and early 2000s to kind of undermine the influence of Christianity and try to tell people not to believe in religion, not to believe in God. And yet here he's come out with this recent statement sort of reasserting his identity as a cultural Christian, saying that he feels at home in the cultural Christian ethic. So we're going to talk about that. But before we get into it, since this is probably my first video, maybe second, that I'm releasing on this channel, I did just want to kind of give a quick overview and throw some vision out there for what I intend to be doing on this channel and what sort of content we are to be making. If you guys remember, we recently did on Amala's channel a reaction to Christians versus ex-Christians and got into a lot of debate and just back and forth about Christian-based views that are conflicting with modern culture, modern values, etc. And a lot of you were asking for more content from me and had questions on Instagram that we reacted to and things like that. And so this is my effort to kind of put a toe into that domain and create conversations that speak to things more directly from a Christian perspective that are going on in the culture and in the world. But I do want to stipulate from the very get-go, though, that I do not want this to be a channel for Christians. I do not want to make content exclusively and explicitly for Christians. I welcome Christians to watch, and I'm sure many of you will be Christian that watch, but I want to keep a seat at the table for people who are questioning, for people who are atheists, for people who may be of other faiths, because we're all on this crazy ride, crazy pirate ship that is modern Western civilization together. And I believe that we will be better off being able to speak to one another in good faith and be able to articulate our beliefs, our thoughts, the way that we're interacting with the world, the way that we're interacting with the society that we live in and the culture that we live in very rational terms and in ways that make sense to people who may not share our first a priori assumptions about the world. So no matter who you are, where you're coming from, if this type of thinking and this type of topics appeal to you, pique your curiosity, are interesting to you, then this is the place for you. And there's no requirement to be Christian, certainly not. And I hope we can have some really interesting discussions. So with that, we're going to get into Richard Dawkins. But one last thing I want to do before we dive into that is introduce a friend and collaborator, one of my very best friends. His name is Tahe IG, and I've asked him to join me on this show. Can I say that yet? Podcast, these conversations, because Tahe is a dear friend of mine who I've known for many, many years, and he is very well versed in Christianity, Christian theology. He's been a preacher for the better part of a decade, maybe over a decade, and knows more about me than me about the Bible and about a lot of stuff. And we often find ourselves having conversations about Christianity, culture, etc., or talking about the culture as Christians, where we say, man, I wish we just had the recording button on for this conversation. So I've asked Tahe to join me as we unpack things like this video on this channel, so that we can kind of exchange our perspectives and hopefully add something of value to you. I'm sure everybody, when they talk to their best friend, think that it's the most profound thing ever. Maybe it's not very profound. We're going to find out. So Tahe, just wanted to quickly throw it to you, introduce yourself, and did I miss anything in this introduction?
No, man, you did not. My name does look like Tahe. It is pronounced Tahe. And just to answer the burning question that's in everyone's mind, I am half white, half black. Just thought I'd let you all know. And it is of note that Taylor and I do have very similar names. No coincidence there. We have other friends not named Tahe. But ultimately, I think the way you put it is the experiment that I'm most interested in. You know, I saw one time someone posted that the previous era of friends playing instruments together and saying we should start a band is what currently is when
We
two
should start a
friends
podcast.
think they say really profound things. They're like, we should have a podcast. But you have proof in the pudding. You're on Amala's show. People love what you have to say and think. So I'm just here to hang out and not try to distract too much from what I know people came for. So I hope I can just be a little supplement to all the great stuff that you're going to share.
Yeah, well, we just looked at the landscape and we're like, you know what the world needs right now? Another podcast. And that's why
baby.
we just had to bring it. And I don't know what it is about collaborating with mixed race individuals, but I guess that is, I've got the yin to that yang or something.
That's Taylor's sweet spot. There's just something there.
I will say, and we'll get into this Dawkins video in just one second, but I will say there is something to be said for, at least Tahe has he's black and white racially, but has a very black and white sort of personality or demeanor, to where, like, when he was in studying in school, he was like, these are my days where I'm studying. Don't talk to me, don't interact with me. He eats like the same meals every day. Getting him to do this podcast, he was like, okay, I have 30 minutes next Thursday, and if you miss that window, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he's very regimented, and when he commits to something, he's 100%. And I could not be more opposite. I am very much like, I don't know, balanced or moderate, or I like to live.
You just
on
go with the flow, man. You're carefree. You're easygoing.
Yeah,
that's what it is, bro.
Yeah. So
I'm a tyrant.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that'll alchemize into something valuable for the audience here as well.
That's why we're perfect for each other, bro. That's why we're just so good for each other.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, without further ado, we're going to play this Dawkins video and get into unpacking it for y'all.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I have to choose my words carefully. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. It seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion, in a way that I think Islam is not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is Islam fundamentally not decent like Christianity?
Yes, the way women are treated. Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different. But the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays. And I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Okay. So there you have it. So that obviously went I could think viral, and at least within the Christian or Christian friendly circles on X or Twitter. I saw this video over and over again. There's already probably been a litany of YouTube reactions to it by on the part of Christians. A lot of people were like celebrating this and spiking the football, saying, "Oh, Dawkins is, saved, and he's, this is a major turn." I did see it emerge, and I guess we can take a look at that real quick. That Dawkins has said something to this effect before, as late as far away ago as 2007. He said he's a cultural Christian to the BBC. And so this isn't necessarily the newest of positions for him, but it's clear that he's at least reasserting his identification as a cultural Christian, especially in the face of sort of the Islamization of Europe and the UK specifically. He talks about how he'd rather have cathedrals than mosques, and doesn't want to see the Christmas go away, the hymns and the carols and the beautiful architecture and everything that's associated with Christianity. But even more than that, the values and the less hostile values to women and gays, as he put it, that Christianity holds. So there is something significant here about him saying this, in that he's obviously somebody who has had nothing kind or nice to say about Christianity or religion at large for quite a long time. And yet I think it has come to a place, and it seems like we're in a moment in culture now, especially in the West and in countries like the UK and the US, where there's a malaise. There's something wrong. Things are not going in a great direction with the rise of wokeism, with the rise of Islamism, with the advancement of the interests of Russia, China, etc. The world is looking a little unstable, a little scary, and I think especially academics like Dawkins are kind of hit off kilter a little bit. They're looking for footing on which to stand in the face of these threats to modernity, threats to Western civilization as we know it. And so far, or I guess heretofore, they haven't found firm enough footing to be a good counter to these things in secular and a purely secular approach. And when if that footing fails you and you get to a deeper level, it seems like you hit the level of Christianity, of the fundamental Western values that have undergirded the Enlightenment and the advancement of Western civilization globally. And it's interesting that that's the place that his foot is meeting, and he's saying, okay, I'm not falling further than this. You can be immigrants to our country, you can do all this, but when it comes to usurping Christianity and cultural Christianity, Christian influence, you can go no further. We have to put our foot down somewhere. Now, obviously, he's still going to advocate for, reason and science and enlightenment and progress and all those things. Of course, we know that that's where Dawkins' main argumentation and where his focus lies. But it's just so fascinating to see him kind of draw the line at cultural Christianity in the face of this threat. So I'm curious, Tay, those are kind of my broad thoughts with this. But how does this hit you, or any thoughts on what I've said so far?
Yeah, a few thoughts, and I think most of them I want to form it in a bit of a question to get some more thoughts and reactions from you. I'm curious, obviously we can't ask Dawkins. One of the first questions I'd like to ask, if I were the interviewer, is what does he mean by cultural Christian? It's one thing to say that I recognize that I'm influenced by some of the values of Christianity, or I recognize the impact of the Christian influence on the modern culture I find myself in, whether that's Europe or America. But to position one and to say, I am a cultural Christian, there's something that you are ascribing to. It is interesting because, and I know he maybe was trying to not be as controversial whenever he was answering the questions, but all of the examples he was giving, and maybe he was caught a little bit on his back foot. I know he wasn't in some sharp debate where he's bringing his A game, but it was funny because he, says, I'm a cultural Christian. And then he goes, I like hymns and Christmas carols and cathedrals look good. It was just such okay, is that cultural Christianity? You like Christmas carols and hymns and you like church buildings. And then it was also unique too, because then whenever he was saying why Christianity is superior to this Islamic influence, it's like he brought up hostility towards women and gays. And I'm not saying I disagree with Dawkins, but I mean, as you know, Taylor, a lot of criticism that people level against Christianity is they feel as though it has done a poor job in how it approaches women and how it treats gays. Anyway, so I found his positioning a little interesting. So my question to you, what do you think, what is cultural Christianity? How would we define it? And at what point does it become, or does it ever become, oxymoronic? You know, is this really a thing? What do people mean when they say it? Any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, you know, coming from like the more traditional Christian side of things, like I guess serious Christians or practicing Christians criticize cultural Christianity because they're like, that just means you come to church on Christmas and Easter and that you just, you know, want to have the veneer of the Christian stuff, but you're not really in touch with the heart of it. And it's not true, which, I mean, there's truth to that, but I don't, even though Dawkins kind of invokes Christmas and hymns and cathedrals and such, I think he knows it's deeper than that. And I think the rubber meets the road when he starts having to draw the contrast between Christianity and Islam as like a fundamental sort of value structure. And I think there are clear distinctions that can be drawn. And I think it's just the simple reality that, you know, I've been reading this book, Dominion by Tom Holland, that is kind of popular right now among intellectuals. And it's basically tracing the history of the influence of Christianity on Western civilization. And the author is not a practicing Christian. He clearly like appreciates the influence of Christianity on Western civilization, but he's not a person of faith per se. So it's not like, you know, there's no bias there on his part. But he goes through like how the creation of hospitals and just the impulse to care for the poor and the sick is emerged in confluence with Christianity, or after, in the wake of Christ's life and the teachings of his followers in the wake of that, and the impulse to even, you know, cross class lines, race lines, treat people as though they are made in the image of God, comes from that Judeo-Christian ethic of Imago Dei, the idea that people are made in the image of God, therefore we should treat them as such. And the idea of, you know, not like the Spartans did, discarding infants that had deformities or disabilities or whatever onto the streets to either die of exposure or be picked up by somebody who would sell them into slavery. I mean, that was the reality that that even under the Roman Empire was like sort of the common ethic. Like there was no inherent human dignity that must be revered. So, and he talked about how Aristotle himself like believed in different like classifications of humans, and believed that people of lower classes like belonged there if they were like lower intellect and of certain races. And so the idea of like racial equality as well is very much has its roots in Christianity. The idea of like spending capital from like the central government of people, or the central government of a state, to sort of give to charity and to care for the sick and to support the poor. That is a very much a Christian idea. And, you know, the list goes on and on and on. And then let alone you get into like the influence of the education on Western civilization with establishment of monasteries and devoted to the study of scripture, the Gutenberg, or the printing press that was invented by Gutenberg, and that spread literacy in order to study the Bible, the Reformation and the Enlightenment that came in the wake of the Reformation, that even again is underpinned by this idea of a knowable universe and an ordered universe, and that the whole scientific enterprise you cannot separate this Christianity from the development of Western civilization. You just can't. And the flourishing that we've experienced since the dawn of Christianity, you know, it's like a hockey stick of human progress, and then boom, like especially since the Enlightenment, we've just experienced this explosion of human flourishing on planet Earth. And I think the new atheists sort of attributed that to the abandonment of religion. But I think what we're seeing with the general malaise in Western civilization right now, in terms of like just the crazy wokeism that we're seeing in, right, the universities have essentially fallen. We're seeing like mass censorship and this sort of neo-totalitarianism emerge, like we saw with COVID, and the governments collaborating with corporations and to control speech and crack down on people. And then there's just like a decline of a clear sense of national identity or even human identity. There's a giant mental health crisis in Gen Z right now. And not just limited to Gen Z either, like women in general have horrible mental health outcomes. Antidepressants are just massively being used at unprecedented levels. And people just are very untethered from something. And meanwhile, we have Russia, China being very aggressive. We have Islamization. We have mass immigration here in the U.S. with our open borders. And it's like, what? Our cities are riddled with crime. You can go on and on. Like something is like, we're clearly like out of touch with whatever brought us. Like everyone you talk to will acknowledge that life felt better, or it felt like we were less racist. We felt more hopeful. We felt like we had a stronger sense of identity. We had better mental health. Families were better off. We had better outcomes across the board, pretty much in society, like a few decades ago. And so as this wave is cresting, it's sort of undercutting the arguments or the conclusions that the new atheists were sort of positing, that if we just get rid of all this religion, then the Enlightenment and our this new utopia, we can enter into that if we could only let go of the influence of religion on us. And it definitely seems like reality has crushed that proposition into bits in recent decades. And I think that's maybe what's forcing. It's like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan, or everyone has a strategy in a fight until they get punched in the face. And it's like you have all these theoretical ideas about how to build a flourishing civilization, but when they get tested, when we actually do abandon the religion, when we actually do let go of the influence of Christianity or villainize it or demonize it, what happens in the wake of that? And I liken it to like sawing off the branch that you're sitting on. And so I have to think that in large part is what we're witnessing with Dawkins making a statement like that, or at least what's like animating him toward that end. And it's not just him. We've seen like Douglas Murray, Mahershala Ali, James Lindsay, a lot of prominent intellectuals, Russell Brand, even Andrew Huberman. A lot of these guys are starting to invoke Christianity, Christian ideals, and infuse that into their personal lives and into their commentary, and are recognizing, if they're not going all the way into converting, they're saying like, dude, there's some answers here that we've clearly looked over. So that's kind of my broad thoughts on all that. And yeah, so you take it from there.
Yeah. So you see cultural Christianity in people acknowledging, especially those who have been antagonistic towards the faith. You see optimism in that, in the sense of, or something, hope, or something to be valued from it. I can't think of the word I'm trying to, but basically, like, you see that there is something good to recognize that you have people that have been antagonistic towards the faith, willing at least to acknowledge the benefits that Christian influence has had on society. So in a way, this whole cultural Christianity slogan or title, someone embracing it, you see that as a step forward to recognize that acknowledgement. That's the word I was looking for, something to redeem. You see that there's something to redeem in someone saying that and acknowledging it, someone like Dawkins.
Yeah, I mean, it's like and in some ways it's an admission of failure, right? Mm-hmm. Which, it's like, what do they say in rehab or whatever? Like, the first step is to acknowledge that you have a problem. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. Dawkins kind of epitomizes that sentiment, but as I said, with a lot of public intellectuals and such, you're starting to see this. And I think the broader at a cultural level, I think there's a new sort of openness to Christian ideals and Christianity. but not necessarily to the dogmatic Christianity of years past, not to the cultural Christianity of like cheesy American prosperity gospel and celebrity pastors and this type of stuff. Like that's not what people are newly open to, but what they are open to is like the rational case for why this provides a model for the world, why this gives an aim, a reference point, why it gives, objective values that we can, when we adhere to them, things seem to work and things seem to flourish. And not only do they seem to, historically, they do, and they have. And yet, whatever that provided us, it's like you hear about, I think this term, cut flower, it means like, a flower that is still planted, obviously still is receiving life from soil and whatnot. But when you cut it, you're living in the sort of dying, shell of what was once full of life. Yeah. And, I think that more and more, whatever we have stepped into in modernity, we're realizing that we severed some roots that we ought not to have severed. And a lot of the malaise that we're witnessing in society at large, like in our families and in academia, in the media, in life in general, we're worse off than we were 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago. And whatever is driving that is causing people to look for answers. And that in and of itself, the recognition that whatever trajectory we're on is not good. I do think that is progress of sorts. And it's interesting you use that word progress, because so much of the change that we've seen for the worse has come in the name of progress. It's come because people have posited like this utopian vision of, we're going to get rid of racism by, by discriminating against white people and pulling them down or whatever. And, we're going to fix the climate by sacrificing cows to change the weather. Was that Jordan Peterson's thing, event. And he used that line. I was like, that's genius. He's like, people are reacting out old school paganism by saying, if we stop allowing cows to live so they fart and, make this greenhouse effect worse, then we can change the weather. It's like, that sounds so pagan and like a tale as old as time when you put it like that. But people are all these like misguided efforts that we've had to try to achieve progress have actually resulted in a regression. They've actually resulted in worse outcomes. They've resulted in more polarization, more suffering in the world, more poverty, more inequality, the deprivation of human rights. And those are not religious. I'm not making a religious argument there. That's just objective reality, And so in the face of that, like we've run with this these new ideas and these new notions, and they're clearly failing. And so where do you go from there? And I don't, of course the Christians are going to be sitting there like, told you so, you need to turn back to Jesus and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, there's truth to that, but I think meeting people, this is such a great opportunity at the moment we're in to like meet people where they're at right now in acknowledging the failure of what we have sort of wagered on philosophically and ideologically in recent decades in the West, and seeing the failure of that. And then you can meet them in those ashes and be like, yeah, man, this sucks, doesn't it? I mean, have you ever thought about the fact that the way that we got to when things were so good kind of had some different fundamental assumptions that we clung to, and had some different values that sort of guided it, and that a different identity that we got. And I think making that case to people is the harvest is ripe, so to speak, to do that right now. And I think it's a big opportunity for Christians to make a strong case for what Christianity has to offer to modern people in the modern world. But you can't come at it in the old, it's like new wine, new wineskins. You can't come at it in the way of like the old, well, brother, let me just, if you want to, stop the Islam from taking over the world, I just need you to bow your head with me right now and recite this prayer. It's like, maybe we'll get there, and maybe that's something that needs to happen at some point in this transformation. But like, let's, be all things to all men. Let's enter in and like, just like Jesus entered into the world, entered into people's lives, entered into their suffering, drew in the dirt, got his hands dirty with where they are. Like, let's do that as Christians and meet people in the failure of bad ideas over the world right now and say, yeah, I'm a citizen of this country too. I'm a citizen of the West too. This sucks, doesn't it? And like maybe walk people through things. Like when Jesus met the people on the road to the Emmaus, it says like he walked them through the scriptures and told them like how the prophets foretold him, and he was foreshadowed in the Torah, and can walk them through that. And I just went to it's a Easter church, and they talked about that story, so it's fresh in my mind. But it's like, let's meet people where they're at and like walk them through, and not just because if we come at it with this like cliched Christianity, and that's one thing. I'm sorry to go on, but that's one thing that I think is a failure on the part of the cultural Christianity that we talked about before, is we've had a lot of Christians who sort of don't understand or appreciate the impact that Christianity has had on Western civilization. They don't understand or what the power of the faith that they have held to, and even in their practice, it's less about it's surface level religiosity, and it's not something that is at the heart level. It's not something that even really connects on an intellectual level. It's just this like sort of cultural momentum that they're just sort of like riding the lazy river of Christian culture, and that is not anything that you can make a compelling case to anybody with. It is, you can't, if you can't justify your own existence, like why would anybody listen to that? Why would anybody want that? And so while I think this is a huge opportunity for Christianity to speak to these issues and give a case for its own existence, and give a case for why people should investigate it and take it seriously and appreciate its influence on the modern world and its utility to advance human flourishing, we cannot just come at it, the same old way of like just bringing people the cheesy Christian stuff that is out of touch. And I think the church has done a bad job of equipping Christians with the appreciation for the faith that they have, and an ability to navigate the world in a way where they can actually speak to people in a way that they can actually understand and appreciate what it is. Like Peter said, always have a ready defense, like an apologia for what your hope and what you believe. And I don't think modern Christians really have that. I don't think they have like a rational case to lay out to people for why what they are wagering their entire existence on is worth wagering on. And I think in large part, a lot of the problems that we are seeing now in the world is a failure on the part of the church and upon the part of Christians to justify their own existence to the culture. We got fat and comfortable and lazy, and this, we lost the culture. And now as the culture's gone, that created the vacuum for the skeptics and the new atheists and everything to kind of fill that. And then we're seeing what happens when you wager on an entirely different value structure and you start to see the disintegration of things that we know and love. And so what's it going to be? Now's our opportunity, but can we seize it as Christians to really like posit something that people can latch onto and actually find compelling?
You used the term I was going to reference. There's a lot of similarities, I think, to this moment and the approach that some people criticize him for it, but the approach that the philosopher and popular apologist William Craig will use in his debates. Often whenever he's going into a debate, particularly just on God's existence, he will start the debate using arguments that some have criticized him for, because the arguments are more arguing for general theism, meaning that the first few arguments that he walks through, even if they're true, that doesn't necessarily get you to the Christian God. It just gets you to maybe at best a monotheistic God, but not necessarily all the way to Christianity. But his defense of that approach is, I think, let's make the case that it becomes a little bit more palatable for everyone to connect with. And if we can just start to see the rationality behind there being a transcendent creator, God, if we can get people there, then I think we get them much closer to the next logical step, which would be maybe a few steps in between, if you will, but moving them closer to the step of the Christian God. But if you try to get them all the way there, that may not be where they are, and that may not be what they're even open to. So let's start them here. And even Dawkins, in a conversation with John Lennox, he told Dawkins that the concept of just simply a God existing, a transcendent being who made all of this, he told John Lennox, he said, I don't think that that is delusional. I don't think that that is irrational. It's this idea of a Christian God. So in a way, Craig is kind of taking those steps, if you will. So to me, there's a little bit of a parallel in this moment of what you're saying, what is to be redeemed with some of these conversations, is that there's a moment that we can bridge this gap, almost engage in this cultural apologetics, where we can maybe not jump all the way to, yeah, you need Jesus, get saved, repeat this prayer, repent, but to meet people where they are in pointing to these values that they do enjoy, that they probably take for granted, but increasingly are now seeing that they're under threat because of the direction our culture is going in. There's a moment for believers to find common ground with non-believers who see the disintegration of cultural norms and practices that they thought were just inculcated in our society, but now realizing that there was actually something these values were grounded in. And so there's a moment now for Christians to step into the conversation similar to Paul in Acts chapter 17 when he's in the Areopagus, and he's speaking to Gentile/Greek people who don't know anything about the scriptures, don't know anything about Judaism, but what they do know about is they know about Zeus, they know about their false gods, and so Paul uses their references. He quotes from their poets, their writers, their philosophers. He quotes from them to then point to the Christian God, to point to Yahweh, to point to Christ. And so you're saying that that's a moment we find ourselves in when you have probably not a Dawkins, right? He might be a little bit more foregone in the sense of, I've seen it, I've dealt with it, but there could be a lot more people that are way more open that see that gap. So I think in closing on this thought, for you've touched on it a little bit, but I think especially at the top, you talked about this not necessarily just being a place or show for Christians, but for non-Christians, and leveraging that. What would be that dots, those dots you would connect, or what would be that common ground, or what would be that conversation that you would have? Let's say you do meet someone who out in public or at a bar or hanging out with some friends who kind of find themselves seeing some of the stuff Dawkins is talking about. And there's a little bit of what you're sensing to be an open heart towards considering the impact that the Christian influences had on our modern culture. What are thoughts you would have either directly to that person or maybe to equip the Christian to navigate that conversation a bit more tactfully? How do you think we can leverage this moment, and for those that are non-Christians that are noticing this gap that Dawkins is pressing on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And to be honest, I think that it's tough because right now we're very much in like kind of a post-Christian moment. As you were talking, I'm thinking about how Billy Graham used to be had this massive wave of people converting to Christianity within the U.S. But those were really like people who had a fundamentally Christian paradigm, who had something in their context. Like Billy Graham was able to come at them with biblical language, with a biblical frame of reference culturally, and sort of just appeal to the fact that you're disconnected from that which you already are familiar, that which you already have in your conscience. And I think that's really, the paradigm within which Billy Graham's ministry really converted a lot of people and got them to come back to Christianity, so to speak, as people in a cultural Christian context. But I think our modern context is very much post-Christian. It's not, people don't share those assumptions. I mean, different regions, perhaps in the South and pockets and stuff, but broadly speaking, and even if they're in the South, there's the deconstruction movement. There's, just generally, you can't assume that people have a Christian framework for ethics and morality. And yet, at the same time, I say post-Christian because they've also heard it all before. They've heard broadly speaking, that Jesus died for their sins, and you believe in him, and that accept him into your heart, and that is what is going to change you, and you're gonna, that's how you become a Christian or whatever. And it's like, on the one hand, that's true, and like there's truth to that, and like that is fundamentally the gospel message, and I would never suggest that we compromise on what is the gospel message. And yet there's there's something about being in a post-Christian world, or a post-Christian West, in which I think we have to approach the conversation closer to what Paul did on the Areopagus, and speak to people within a framework that isn't. It's sort of like when they say, when you're debating someone, and you want to keep the prefrontal cortex engaged. You want to keep the rational, reasoning, thoughtful part of their brain engaged, and you don't want to trigger that fight or flight mechanism where they're going to stop being reasonable, where they feel like they have to get on the defensive. And I feel like when we're talking to people about faith and Christianity, if you start to pluck some of those chords that they've heard before when it comes to the sort of dogmatic, rote, sort of thoughtless pleasantries that we have repeated in Christianity for decades and decades, that they're already familiar with, then I think you can lose them. And I don't think we should put the onus on other people to have the translation software to get to the heart of what we're saying. I think we need to grasp the heart of what we're saying, and then figure out how to become all things to all men, how to speak in terms that they can understand, that will resonate with them. And again, I'm not suggesting that we compromise Scripture at all. I'm not suggesting that we water down the gospel at all. And yet, it's like, how do you convey the gospel to somebody, where they're at? And you think about Jesus with like the woman at the well, or the woman caught in adultery. Like, how did he convey the gospel to them in the context in which they found themselves? And how did Paul convey the gospel to people in the context of the Areopagus? Like, you're going into their territory, so the onus is on you to communicate the truth in a way that is going to be understood, or at least like move people closer. It's like, when you're talking about being a witness of Jesus, that's what we're called to do, is you will go and be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. Like, does that means like speak to what I know, testify what I've seen? Like, don't overstretch your don't go out over your skis with all these sweeping claims. Don't try to like indoctrinate people into an external dogma, but speak out of your subjective, personal relationship with God, your experience. Testify to the truth of him, testify the truth of his gospel, testify the truth of Scripture. But it's not this like detached dogmatic thing that we're presenting to the world. It's and if your relationship with Jesus is real, then he's the vine, you're the branch, that life's flowing through you, that you have a genuine connection to him. I think that'll come through in your communication with people. And we're promised that the Holy Spirit will guide us in all truth. He'll give us the words to say. We can be an effective witness. We're empowered to be effective witnesses by virtue of our genuine connection to Jesus. So it's less about like, what should you say in this situation, and more about like, are you actually connected to him? Are you actually living out your Christian faith? And are you approaching the conversation in the way that Jesus would, rather than like, are you communicating the right bullet points? We've had the right bullet points for freaking decades now. And look where the right bullet points got us. It creates a shallow, dogmatic Christianity. People think that they just, okay, I checked the boxes. I prayed the prayer. I said the right thing. I'm going to church every Sunday. And that's all I need to do. And then you tell people that's what they need to communicate to other people. And, it's like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, where's the genuine transformation that's happening in your life because of your connection to the vine? Where's you can't bring transformation to other people that you haven't experienced yourself. And I see a lot of these political commentators on X and in social media that are on the conservative side of things and speak as Christians. And yet it's clear that like, they're so out of touch. Like, have you seen this? There's this OnlyFans model that converted to Christianity, and she was like a pastor's daughter, was like big on OnlyFans or whatever, and then all of a sudden, met someone who spoke into her life, and she got saved and has now renounced that. But there's so much I'm seeing on X from Christians or professing Christians who are like, she's not really saved, and this whore is gonna. It's like, dude, what are you kidding me right now? Like, what you're using the name of Christ, and yet you clearly don't know him at all. And he had plenty of words to say to people who said to me, Lord, Lord, and didn't do what I say. So I know it's a very long-winded way. You asked me for like steps to that, or like bullet points to give people to like connect the dots for them that are seeing these issues. But I think that, when you look at the Gospels and you see Jesus' interactions with people, he had a way of piquing people's curiosity, of defying their expectations. Like, again, I'm thinking of the woman at the well in John 4, where he like crossed gender, racial, cultural lines, spoke to this woman who's a Samaritan, who he wasn't supposed to be speaking to. His disciples marveled that he was willing to speak to her. She marveled that he was willing to speak to him. And she, at first, was like, why are you even talking to me? And then he justified that. And then he basically blows her mind with telling her what she'd done in the past, and then she tries to obfuscate the conversation, and then he brings it back and blows her mind again and manifests himself. Like, when I look at the way Jesus interacts with people, it's not about like, well, if you just say the sinner's prayer with me, then you can go to heaven. And like, that's going to magically be what transforms civilization again. It's like, there's this awakening to a deeper unified truth and reality that is embodied in who Jesus is and in what Christianity offers to the world. And, the same way like C.S. Lewis, he came to his conversion after studying, Renaissance mythologies and the mythologies of like Northern Europe, and seeing all the like the beauty and value and truth, that metaphorical truth, moral truth that could be extracted from these stories. And then he looked at Christianity through the lens of mythology and it being a mythological story. And then he asked himself like, well, wait, what if this is actually like a true story? And it all kind of fit, And so I think you need to give people reasons to investigate and reasons to contend with this. Give them a reason to contend with it in your personal witness, in your ability to give a ready defense of what the Christian worldview has to offer. And, they'll come. That's the Holy Spirit's job at the end of the day, right? It's not our job to like push them across the finish line. It's the Holy Spirit's job to do what only God can do and turn the light bulb on for people. But what you can do as a witness is shine the light that you have and, speak to what you know, testify to what you have seen. And I think that can lead people in the right direction. But we've got to get away from this dogmatic Christianity and this dogmatic approach to evangelism, this dogmatic approach to, or this identity as a cultural Christian, where we interact with culture only in these like culture war field battles, and we're irrelevant to people in their everyday lives. Like, what good is it to promote, Christian causes politically so that Christians have more power, or that a Christian virtue is imposed on more people, if you're not living that in your own life? And if the witness that you are bearing by living those out is not drawing people to Jesus, like, why would voting for something or advocating for something to be imposed on other people through political power drive people closer to Jesus? That's just going to push them away. So all that to say, yeah, I don't have an answer for you to just say like, here's how you can walk people from the crap that you're seeing in the world to becoming a confessing Christian. But what I can say is that you should strive to live faithfully to Christ, be as Christ-like as you can in your personal life, and also have that ready defense. Understand your faith, and as with as much as you can, and appreciate the world that we live in, the Western civilization, the influence of Christianity on our country, the Western civilization. Don't place your identity in, we're America's a Christian nation, but place it in, I'm a Christian. I happen to live in a country that happens to have staked itself and wagered on Christian ideals, and a civilization broadly in the West that has staked itself on Christian ideals. And we're grateful for that. But I live in among people who don't make those connections. And I'm better off, helping helping make those connections for people. And then I think it can lead to more curiosity, more appreciation. But I don't think we can even start the conversation. We're kind of in a hole as Christians that we've dug into ourselves with cultural Christianity, with prosperity gospel, with dogma, with all the cheesiness and hypocrisy and church hurt and all this nonsense. So before you're, set your own house in order, before you criticize the world, before you go out and start telling people they need to become Christians, like, you have to have some humility in approaching that conversation and be aware of those perceptions that people have of Christianity, and then, like Jesus did, undercut those expectations, subvert them, but still shine through with gospel truth, with sacrificial love, with the wisdom that defies this world, that defies the natural, and I think that's how you can cut through to people. So sorry for the very long-winded answer, but it was an astute question, and I don't have a simple answer for that, but that's as best as I can say it. I think what Christians need to be doing right now.
Yeah, well, that was a good attempt, Taylor, but let me give you the 4-step plan that has worked perfectly every time I've executed it.
Oh, please. And I feel free to answer your own questions if you have answers.
Step 1, Taylor, the Romans road.
Mm-hmm.
God, I don't even know the Romans road.
1, God's love is fun. 2, sin separates you. 3,
yeah.
Christ died for you. 4, gotta open the door. That was one I learned in middle school or something.
But
which I don't want to come off like I'm mocking that. Like, that is a
100%.
fair description of the process. But man, like, if you think that is the effective message that people need to hear, that's just a matter of like information and steps, then
exactly,
that is following that formula got us to where we are.
No, man, I think what you're laying out is true in the sense that there just requires a lot of relational equity and gospel contextualization in order to leverage these moments as effective as we can, knowing that there is no perfect way that's going to lead to, if you can do it just right, that means everyone's going to convert. Everyone's going to become like, nah, man, you can have the most thoughtful, most nuanced, most contextual, culturally relevant, gospel saturated, spirit led presentation, but it doesn't mean that people are going to move towards the faith. I think ultimately something that we both desire is there are already enough obstacles to the faith itself. Yeah. So why add any more?
It's a good way of putting it.
Why get in our way?
Yeah, gospel's offensive. Christ is a stumbling block to the Greeks. I mean, that's in there already,
Yeah, it's like, so, because of that, why would we go out of our way to make it any more challenging? And honestly, this is the only, this is really the last thought I want to share. I mean, if you want to, take it somewhere else, but I don't know why when you were sharing, man, I think a thought that went through my mind was Jesus was talking to his disciples. This is Matthew chapter 9, and at the end of Matthew chapter 9, it says he looks at the crowds and his heart's moved because they're sheep without a shepherd, harassed and helpless, and he turns to the people following him and he says that the harvest is plentiful, but there are few laborers. Mm. And I just think the moment we're in, and the moment we'll always be in, I think it requires a kind of work, a kind of devotion. Sometimes when I'm talking to people about navigating these conversations and the things we need to learn and the things we need to know, and you can't know everything. You don't need to know everything. But I think instead we kind of swing to this other extreme, which is just being completely apathetic about the conversation. And we're not really taking any strides. We don't see it really as much of a focal point to develop this cultural fluency mixed with this gospel fluency, to have these really thoughtful engagement with people. And I think that's why, broadly speaking, Christianity has become so unattractive. In a verse that you were mentioning just a moment ago, Paul talks about how the message of Christ, it is like an aroma to death to those who don't believe it. But I'm not even talking about that, right? It's kind of like when, Jesus says that they've hated me, they're going to hate you. And then I look at some Christians and they'll quote that verse. It's like, nah, man, they just hate you because you're a jerk. Like,
Yeah.
they don't hate you
Or
because
dumb.
you're like Jesus.
Yeah.
They just hate you because you're just being an a-hole, dude. It's the same thing. It's like, Christ being a stumbling block, the message being an aroma of death. And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, it's not like this, like, we'd be lying to people if it were like, oh, it's just this beautiful, compelling message. It's like, nah, fam, like they crucified Christ. But let the message be the thing that smells like death.
Exactly.
Let Christ be the stumbling block. Let us not be the stumbling block. And I think many times, like the reason why Christianity, it is unattractive. We haven't even gotten to the aroma of death yet. We just in the stank of church.
Yeah.
That's
very true, man.
We're just in the bad aroma of lame. And so that's what's funny about the whole cultural Christian thing. It's like, I think when you have someone like a Dawkins, when they call themselves a cultural Christian, it's like a step in the right direction. But when we are talking about other Christians and their cultural, that's like we're moving in the wrong direction. And there's a little bit of play. Obviously, context matters when it comes to those phrases and stuff like that. But I do think that is something unique. And I think ultimately, that's at least what I'm hearing from you. What I'm hearing from you is this thoughtfulness. It is this intentionality. It is this approach that let the gospel, let Christ, let that be, if anything, the stumbling block.
Yes.
Let us get out of the way, but let us put in the work that's required to engage meaningfully with people in a way that it is a good defense, in a way that we are laborers in this harvest, that it is motivated because we care and we love about people, and that we can see moments like this and kind of put our hand on the pulse of where culture and where society is and step back and say, man, there's a moment here and there's a conversation to be had, and to have wisdom and when to lean into that. And then before those moments come, I think if there's anything practical that I would like point to is before those moments present themselves, that we have been building the relational equity with people because we genuinely love and care about them, so that when those conversations come, because you know what will make up for a lot of mistakes in conversations is relational equity. And I don't think we're going to navigate it perfectly, seize it right. But I think for a lot of people who have been turned off to Christianity for reasons that, again, could have been avoided, I think the reason why they got turned off is because there wasn't that relational equity, because there's room to give people grace, to give people understanding when you build that relational equity with them. And so, yeah, I think with Dawkins making this acknowledgement, it does say something about our culture. Well, obviously, it's not like necessarily this big movement. There are other people who would never acknowledge that, would never acknowledge being a cultural Christian in Dawkins' sense. But I do think there are people who do feel like, man, that value system, there really is a lot of great stuff about it. And, it's interesting even when you see people leave the faith and when people deconstruct or deconvert, they really do hold on to the parts to the parts they like. And it's because there is something beautiful about those parts. And there's a reason why they reject the other parts, because that's not necessarily as beautiful or palatable. So those are my only thoughts about that. Any closing thoughts or questions from you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the realization that Dawkins et al. Are kind of coming to is that even if it's not something they want to say is true or take any kind of leap of faith in the metaphysical aspects of it, there's something about Christianity that works. And I think that's an important step, because at least you can get people to ask, is Christianity true because it works, or does it work because it's true? And if you're saying you want to live in a society in which the culture is Christian, because of the fact that that Christian influence causes the society to work, to flourish, to have peace, to have equality, to care for the poor, to pursue, education, to be moral, etc. Then you're saying I want Christianity because it works. But to me, that is a piece of evidence in favor of being able to come to the conclusion that Christianity works because it is true. And Jesus in John talks about the different witnesses to himself, and he talks about John and the prophets and like the authority of Scripture and like history that's been written about him, and he talks about the testimony of his works, and he says believe on me because of the evidence of the works I'm doing. And I think you could maybe extend that, if you want to be charitable, to the fact that when people follow Jesus, his ethic and follow it in truth, right? Not like you were saying, becoming an obstacle to Jesus and by an obstacle to the true gospel. Like, let the gospel be the thing that's offensive. Let Jesus's actual method, and Jesus' actual words of saying, if anyone that comes to me and doesn't deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. If you hang on to your life, you lose it. If you give up your life, you'll find it for eternity. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He said that to somebody who was like, yeah, I'll follow you. He's like trying to literally persuade people not to follow him by saying, it's an all or nothing proposition. This I have to be the organizing principle of your entire reality. But let Jesus is offensive enough on his own. You have to eat his flesh, drink his blood, all those things that are so offensive in the gospel. It doesn't need Christians, people who claim to be following Christ, and acting hypocritically in his name, being dogmatic in his name, being dumb and not even understanding the gospel themselves or embodying the gospel themselves, and yet advocating on behalf of Christ, which is a way of taking the Lord's name in vain. By the way, I think we've seen this, if you're familiar, there's this whole Christ is King discourse on Twitter right now, where certain personalities are attaching Christ is King to their tweets and using that formulation. But it's almost like done in a dog whistle sense, where the intent is not to merely say that Christ is King of my life and King of the world, and to proclaim your allegiance to Christ, but to kind of proclaim your allegiance to a political movement or people who are of a certain political persuasion. That's using the Lord's name in vain. But anyway, those are all obstacles to actual gospel, and the gospel is offensive enough on its own. And it is interesting that we have this dichotomy of we want more cultural Christianity in the way of the Dawkins acknowledging it, and yet we don't want more cultural Christianity, because what it produces is a Christianity, an adherence to Christianity that is fundamentally shallow, flawed, and doomed to be dissected and to fail, because it'll only ever be a hollow echo of the real thing. And yet, when we pattern our lives and societies and families and our civilization after Christian ideals and Christian truths, things seem to work. And so we want that because we want the good outcomes. But I think the question we all have to ask ourselves, Dawkins included, is does Christianity, is it true because it works, or does it work because it's true? And yeah, that is what we all will have to contend with. But for Christians, the way we get people to contend with that reality is to get the hell out of the way and not live hypocritically, not pursue political power and try to impose Christianity on people through those means, not to relegate your duty to be Christ-like. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, laborer is a great word. You said the harvest is plentiful, laborers are few. Labor, and it is by the sweat of your brow. It entails work, and that means digging in intellectually to your faith, digging in to relationally to people in your life, doing due diligence in every domain of your life to be consistent. If you're proclaiming a faith that cares for the poor because they are made in the image of God. What are you doing for the poor? Are you donating to charity? Are you doing anything for them? If you're proclaiming a faith that believes in equality because of the image of God, do you treat people differently on the basis of their skin color, or are you doing anything to promote, harmony in the world because of your faith? Like, let's live consistently with what we believe, and that's the labor of the harvest, just as much as it's not necessarily going on a street corner and yelling at people that they're going to hell. We've seen the results of that. But I think a lot of the labor of the harvest is, yes, preaching the gospel, but also like doing so in a way where we're not undercutting Jesus' message with our own shortcomings, with our own failure to live up to the values, the ideals that we espouse, the Savior that we espouse. And that's an indictment on myself. It's an indictment on all of us to have some humility and really take our following of Christ seriously, and take up our cross and bear that responsibility, and try to reflect him as well as we can to the world, and live in the fear of God in that regard. But it is, like I said, this is a hopeful moment in history.
Yeah.
It is an opportunity. The harvest is ripe, and the laborers are few. So I guess if you're a Christian watching this, do the labor, man, in your own life of living up to this thing. And if you're a non-Christian watching this, hopefully, like Dawkins, your interest is piqued, and you're contending at least with the right thing. Don't contend with the straw man of Christianity, of imperfect Christians, infallible Christians, but be confronted with the influence of Christianity on Western civilization, the degradation, the disorder, the chaos that ensues from departing from those ideals, and ask yourself what that points to, maybe. And
exactly. And if anything, man, also in a way, like, to the non-Christian, do the work as well. I think that's one of the things I'm always looking to see. It's it's kind of like this. Basically, it's what you're saying is, does Christianity work because it's true, or is it true because it works? And so it's this difference between utility and ontology. Utility, the working of it, it's this gets us to from point A to point B. The ontology, it is truth. It is the nature of being. It is. This is what it is. And the thing I always just want to, I guess, just offer up to those who do recognize the utility of Christianity, but aren't necessarily persuaded to its ontology, its existence, that it is what it says it is. What I would love the alternative, proposition, that if there are aspects about it that it does work, why is it working? What's under it working? So that you can propose the alternative. I was listening recently to a podcast of the David Pakman Show, who is not a Christian, and he had Daniel Dennett on, who is
I listened to Dennett and Peterson today. It's funny.
Oh, nice. Yeah, he had Daniel Dennett on, who's a part of this new atheism ecosystem that happened.
He's one of the four horsemen with Dawkins.
One of the four horsemen, he is. And as they are popularly called, it's such a funny phrase
I know. It's an
to use.
Apocalyptic reference.
But anyway, he was talking to David Pakman, and he was acknowledging that one of the unique... I mean, they were actually having a conversation like, oh, yeah, you can completely ground this stuff and just purely on human value, and, you don't need the myths and the stories and the traditions. They were both agreeing on that. One of the things that Daniel Dennett positioned as a unique feature of religion broadly, but Christianity in particular, is the value of community and the gathering, like a place to have needs be heard, the poor served, engaging in this ecosystem of relationships that then go out to serve and to care. And David asked him, if this is something that is so valuable, why do you think that we've never made an alternative to that, speaking about non-Christians? And they didn't really land on anything. It was that's something that should happen. It should take place. And that even that was a similar conversation that Alex O'Connor was having with Sam Harrison, saying that maybe there's something about religion itself, because they actually hit on something very similar. And Sam was thinking, oh, we can come up with better motivations behind the benefits that religion provides. Like, yeah, religion provides benefits, but there are other motivations that we can, posit. And then Alex O'Connor is like, well, okay, well then what is it? But maybe there is something fundamental, part and parcel with religion itself that motivates that. So I'm simply saying, just to sit back and to say to those, and I'm not saying that there aren't any atheists doing this. This is more known in the worlds of a philosophical, like in the philosophical space, right? So if you come across atheists that are also philosophers, they are doing a lot of hard work in ethics and morality and moral realism and a lot of these kinds. So I'm not saying it's not happening. I just think it's interesting because kind of what we get is we either have an acknowledgement like a Dawkins who was like, hey, look, like, it is what it is. I'm a cultural Christian because this stuff, and I mean, kind of, or you have the other thing where it just is kind of like this hand waving, like, well, it's self-evident. Human value. We can just ground it in that. There's enough purpose and beauty in that. And I'm just like, nah, man, like, if we know this is working, extract for me and distill it and give me the alternative, to my Christianity. That can work. That can hold society. That can stand against the cancers of these very destructive ideologies we're facing. I'm very open to hear what they are. And maybe there are some out there that are a bit more popular getting traction and I just haven't come across them. I'd love to hear about them. So feel free to leave a comment or send a video, anything, because I think that's often where I step back and I say, to me, Christianity is the most compelling of any worldview that I've ever engaged with. I think it is the most consistent, the most rigorous. It definitely has its weaknesses, if you will. I don't think I have everything figured out, but overall, comprehensively, it is the most compelling worldview in its totality that I've ever encountered. And it is the worldview, to me, that maps onto reality the best. And so I'm open to see the alternatives.
Yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me there, as you know. And I think the evidence of that is how many people have found it compelling. And also...
yeah, across cultures and across timelines and across languages and across...
Yeah, man.
That's what I'm saying. There's something about it. And I think that's like, what is it? Like, right. Even if it's not true, even if the whole thing is fake, right. What is it?
And that's not meant as a mic drop gotcha, like, now you got to believe because I got you, atheist. It's like,
exactly.
No, that's a reason to have your curiosity.
It could be wrong. It could be a lie. The whole thing could be false.
Yeah, it's like, at least it's worth entertaining and contending with, because there's how many people, and then there's also just look at history and the influence of civilization, and it is the branch on which you are standing of the tree of human history, and in large part, and yet we have made great efforts to kind of saw that off. And you're right, man, with what you're talking about with the Dennett conversation. If you guys didn't know this too, I mean, another reason I love having Tahe as a collaborator in this endeavor is he, for fun, listens to atheists debate each other about the nature of morality, the origins of it, and all of that. He's very much into like steel manning his own positions, entertaining the best arguments against Christianity and the Christian faith. And we were talking this past week about this Alex O'Connor, Sam Harris debate. We almost reacted to that instead of this Dawkins video. But when I shared my thoughts with you on it, that I was just like, okay, yeah, let's debate whether there's, objective values or an objective basis for morality. Let's posit all these hypotheticals, and if you're the guy walking into the conference, or what, all the different things that they talked about. But like, I'm just sitting here thinking, you guys are trying to agree to terms on a debate about the grounding of moral values, and yet you haven't come up with a coherent system of moral values, and you haven't come up with a way to communicate that in a compelling way that can spread at scale, that people can agree upon, even if they're not able to engage in the debates at the level which I couldn't hardly follow what they were talking about. I know you did better than me because you're more versed in this stuff. And I'm like, yet this is the hope. This is the alternative. Like you're saying, like, show me the alternative. I'm willing to see it, but like, this is what we have to stake civilization on, and wager on, y'all's formulation of morality and ethics and virtue and how we should pursue a basis for the natural order. We don't have time to wait for y'all to figure all this out. The world's already on fire. And meanwhile, we have the tried and true, basis and system that caused all this to flourish in the first place, that y'all kind of cut down and caused a lot of this. I mean, I don't think it really caused. I think it's inevitable outgrowth of like the failures of the church and philosophy. Like Nietzsche declared God is dead in 1850. That's still, some of these things work in cycles and patterns. And I'm not saying the new atheist like killed God or whatever, but it's kind of like, it's just interesting to watch these sort of floundering and trying to formulate an agreed upon basis for morality and for an identity and how to navigate the world and the ought instead of just what is, but like for a materialistic worldview to posit what ought to be, how people ought to behave, how people ought to have relationships with one another, what they ought to pursue as moral virtue and values. It's difficult for them to even agree on what any of those are or having an agreed upon basis for those, let alone, like Jordan Peterson talks about, we figure out patterns for how we ought to live through story. And that's what we do when we go to the movie theater and watch Spider-Man or whatever it may be. We see the hero. This person acted courageously. He defended his family. He was loyal to his community. He fought the threat. He brought back the gold from the dragon to share with the community. And we internalized some lesson. He overcame some moral deficiency. Like those patterns of heroism is how we inculcate values on a cultural level and a psychological level. Like that is how we navigate the world and order the world of facts that we live in. If all you can do is observe facts, then they quickly become overwhelming. You have to be able to organize them into a hierarchy and say, if the nature of time, the nature of living is that you have to make choices to respond to the world in which you live. And those choices are informed by a value structure, and that you say, this is valuable to do. So I'm making my choice on this basis and not that basis. I'm acting based on this should and not this should. And the way that we know the way that we come to know what to do when we're faced with choices in our lives is through story. And the Christian story is the story of Western civilization. I was just at Jordan Peterson's We Wrestle with God tour this past week in Nashville, and that's exactly the case that he makes. The Enlightenment has failed because it is only basically deals in the world of facts and doesn't have a scalable model of how to inculcate a value structure on which everyone can agree upon, on how we can order ourselves in the world and orient ourselves toward the highest good. And the Christian story is the story that already worked to create Western civilization, to be the hockey stick in history, to create human flourishing and human rights and all this stuff. And yet we kind of don't find that satisfying anymore. We want something that is purely going to work in a fact-based world. And we don't want to have any oughts that we can't ground in materialism. And it's just, we don't have time to wait for a solution because the world's sinking. And and again, that ties us back to the premise of this video. We have Dawkins acknowledging that he needs cultural Christianity for that explicit reason. So, so I'm sure we will have plenty more opportunities to dig further into this stuff.
Yeah.
I think I've expunged everything I can offer on this topic tonight.
I'm going to say one quick thing, a final thought, and then because I got to go too. But it's very, very fast, just because I know, again, I live in this space a little bit, so we'll have to revisit this. The thought that to this closing thing that we're saying, something that a lot of people will say is, we're like, hey, like this has worked, but I'm open for you to a surface criticism that's often given is you're positing a God of the gaps argument. And so they point to that's what's happened all the time in history, but science has always found a way to undercut it. And so the God of the gaps is, oh, lightning, God does that. Oh, fire, God does that. Oh, sickness, God does that. Because we didn't understand things about chemistry and microbiology. And so science has always been consistent with uncovering God's not behind it. There's something else. And so whenever you say this, like, hey, like it works, so what's the alternative? I mean, they will posit that you're just doing another God of the gaps. But we don't have time. We're not going to, I'm just cracking up. I'm just acknowledging the criticism for those that are thinking it. I'm acknowledging it. And I actually think we'll have to talk more about this later because I do have to go. But I think actually what we see is in this circumstance, I would argue that what's being posited is a science of the gaps and not a God of the gaps. And there's a reason behind that. That's what's happening with this. But well, I'll just tease that. I don't know if we're going to ever talk about that. I just want to acknowledge it because we do have to go. But if you guys are interested and people watch this at some point, and if you've made it this far and you do want us to talk about it, let us know and we'll dive into that conversation sometime. That's all I got.
Yeah, I love it. Look, we're all about steel manning, and to what I was saying earlier, like I don't just want this to be a channel for Christians, and I don't just want to be a Christian voice on this channel. I want to invite non-Christian skeptics. I already have a short list of friends and friends who are atheists, friends who are PhD evolutionary biologists and gay and all kind of, not the same person, but a different list of people. I'd love to have Amala on and talk about some of this kind of stuff at some point, because we don't just want to be in our own little echo chamber and be able to beat the crap out of straw men on this. We want to engage with ideas on the merits and really have serious discussions on this channel. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this, got something out of it, please consider sharing. We're just getting started, so send this to somebody who would find it interesting. Make sure you like and subscribe. It's such a cliche to say that, but literally we need that right now as we're on the ground floor of something great. If you don't want this to fizzle into nothingness, like we all will, according to the materialists, just kidding, then yeah, please like and subscribe. And if you want to follow Tahe, what's your socials to follow? I know Tahe is a businessman now, so he's not. He's doing a little bit of thoughtful
and look,
content.
In the future, I will have ways for people to engage with me. If you're a small business owner and you want some marketing help,
if you want a guy this intelligent and thoughtful to be running your marketing,
to be helping you out with your marketing services and strategy. No, I mostly post business content, but I am in the works of making some things that fit a little bit more appropriately to these kind of conversations. If you are interested in just checking out my marketing stuff and what I do, then you can just type in my name, Tahe Governor, on Instagram and follow me there, or LinkedIn. If I have any business professionals, you can do LinkedIn as well. Tahe Governor on Instagram and LinkedIn. But you can hold off until I launch something a little bit more appropriate.
All right, fair enough. And I'm at Taylor Trandall. If you're not already following me on Instagram or Twitter, I'm T Trandall. So, yeah, guys, this was fun. We're doing it. I think we're actually going to publish this one. We've recorded like 5 or 6 fake episodes to this point.
No, bro, it's closer to like 10.
Well, we were waiting for Tahe to get his awesome camera shot and everything.
Yeah, my setup was really bad. In microphone, everything was terrible.
No, that honestly wasn't the reason, but it's fine. But hey, we're doing it, and yeah, thank y'all for joining along, and stay tuned for more. I want to have some different formats, so I want to have these long form discussions with Tahe. I'm going to try to do some more short form stuff, and then I'd love to do some more like in-person interviews with some of those people I was talking about before. So great things to come. Hopefully,
like the gay microbiologist.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Now I've got to find one. Yeah. I got to find a gay microbiologist who's black and female. And that'll check all the boxes. No. All right, guys. Peace out. Love ya.